Steve?
Sure, go ahead. Yeah, and so you guys know I'm recording, so I have this. We'll have this available for download and for sharing afterwards as well. So if people can't make it, they can see it on the video.
So thank you very much, everyone, for attending today on Halloween. I'm Andrew Capuchunas, the Secretary and Webmaster of the New York Map Society. And I'd like to start off by encouraging you to attend our next Zoom meeting, which is going to be Saturday, November 21st at 2 p.m., where we're going to be very lucky to have Dr. Larry Ties is going to speak about his recent co-authored book, Theodore DeBry, America, The Complete Plates, 1590 to 1610, which includes not only maps, but images of Native Americans. But right now, we're very happy to have Lars Grava with us, who's a native New Yorker of Latvian heritage. He lived in Latvia for extended periods of time, involving himself in the country's political, legal, and economic development, including his work at the Latvian Development Agency in Riga. Lars is a lawyer and currently works at the World Bank in Washington, D.C., advising developing country governments on regulatory reforms. He's worked in more than 50 countries on 6 continents. Lars will speak today about his passion for antique maps and the depiction of the Baltic states, and especially his ancestral homeland, Latvia, in antique maps. Welcome, Lars.
Yeah, welcome, Lars.
Okay, fantastic. Andrew, Steve, thank you so much. I'm going to open my, first I share. Okay, let me just do that. Share screen. Here we go. Can you see that?
Yep, it's loading. There we go.
Okay, great. So I will minimize this. Fantastic. So Steve, Andrew, thank you so much, and everybody for joining. When I was first asked to make a presentation about my collection of maps of the Baltic states, I wasn't really sure how best to title it. So when I looked at the collection, I saw all kinds of different empires, kingdoms, duchies, commonwealths, fiefdoms, confederations, but I realized that they are all really about one region, which is the Baltic states. And that made me think that throughout their history, the Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania have been subject to many neighboring countries. So they've been at the edge of empires, which is the title of my presentation. So I hope you'll find this presentation interesting, enlightening, and maybe there might be a little bit of spookiness in it as well. So what I'd like you to leave us with today is at least 3 takeaways. First of all, we will find out who won the War of the Cartouches. Then we will find out how many ways you can say Ikstile. And finally, we will learn which supernatural beast prowled the Baltics. So first, I'll talk about the geography of the Baltics and why it's important, believe it or not, in European history. Then I'll talk about the map collection. I'll talk a little bit about Baltic history, just to catch everybody up on the highlights of Baltic history. And I will show you some cool maps from the collection. And this whole experience of preparing this presentation has been a bit of a journey of discovery for me. And I discovered that although a map is a 2-dimensional object, you can dig deeply into it and you can go into many more dimensions. So, although we're talking about antique maps today, we'll have to take a look at maps of contemporary maps so you can orient yourselves. Now, this is the key question. Where in the world are the Baltic states? So they are right in the middle of this map. Here's Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. They are on the Baltic Sea between Sweden, Finland, Russia, Belarus, Poland, and not very far from Germany. They are not quite Nordic, not quite Central Europe, and not quite Eastern Europe. And I would propose that we can safely say that they are in Northeast Europe. However, as Andrew may know, some Lithuanians might disagree. Lithuanians say that the exact geographic center of Europe, if you measure it from Portugal to the Urals and from Lapland to Cyprus, is located in Lithuania. And in fact, there is a monument in Lithuania, in the town of Purniškės, which designates, as you can see there on the rows, the exact, what they believe is the exact center of Europe. And some of you may also know that the Balts love their monuments. So there you have another monument that you may not have known about. So even though this presentation focuses on the antique maps of Latvia, the history of the Baltics is so intertwined that we need to know also about what happened in Estonia and Lithuania. And I'd like to ask you to become very familiar with this map. So the main defining characteristic of the Baltic states is the Baltic Sea on the west, on the left-hand side. And over the millennia, the Baltic Sea has been both a blessing and a curse, as we will find out. Another key characteristic is that these are low elevation countries with no major mountains or mountain ranges. And this has had an important impact on their history. In fact, the highest mountain in the Baltics is in Estonia, and it is 318 meters high, or about 1,000 meters high. So for the Latvians, with their geysing cones at only 312 meters, this is a source of a little bit of rivalry and maybe just a bit of jealousy. The combined size of the Baltic states is 67,000 square miles, which is about the size of New England. Estonia in the north is bordered on the east by Russia, on the north by Finland, and Sweden is across the sea. When you look at maps of Estonia, what's important to be on the lookout for are the islands off of the west coast and Lake Peipus on the eastern border of Estonia. Now, Latvia, in the middle of the Baltic states, has the peninsula of Courland or Kurzeme on the west coast. And there's a long river called the Daugava, which stretches out into the Russian hinterlands. And it's been an important trade route for millennia. And when I look at an antique map, I usually, the first thing I look at is the peninsula of Courland, and I can approximately tell how old the map is by how accurate the coastline is. And last but not least, we have Lithuania in the south, which has limited access to the Baltic Sea, but it has a long southern and eastern border. And this is critical to understanding Lithuania's slightly different history from Estonia and Latvia. So why are the Baltics important in European history? It's been a very difficult history since they've been at the crossroads of many geographic interests and powers. This is a contemporary map. Well, it was done recently in 2011, and it's about the expansion of Christianity in Europe. It's in Latvian, but bear with me, I will briefly take you through it. So it covers the time from the 8th to the 15th century. And the darker orange areas down here are the areas that were first Christianized or first became Christian. And if we stretch up and we look towards the northeast, we see that the light yellow countries were the last ones to become Christianized. So the Baltics were the last pagan holdouts in Europe. Now, you may know about the Crusades to the Holy Land, which went south, but I'll bet fewer of you know about the Northern Crusades, which took place in the 12th, 13th, and 14th centuries. In the 13th century, the territories of Latvia and Estonia were conquered by the Northern Crusaders, who were mostly Germans. Lithuania was able to drive them back, and it remained a pagan kingdom until it later converted to Catholicism and joined in union with Poland. So, as a result of these campaigns, the Baltics became the border between Eastern and Western Christianity. So Orthodoxy stayed on the right-hand side and Roman Catholicism stayed on the left-hand side. And that's what this border is going down the map. So another feature another interesting feature of the Baltics is that it's part of many different regions. So here's my first example of antique maps from the collection. It's from 1687. And there are 3 different sheets, as you can see. One is of Poland, another of Sweden, and the third of Muscovy, or later, which became later Russia. And the circles represent the Baltics. And these are, so you can see that these are the predominant powers that dominated the region. And viewed from these different lenses, the Baltics are common to all of them. Truly, as I title this, at the edge of empires. So this is a map of the Soviet Union from 1989. And some of you may not be familiar with this perspective. So let me explain. This is the entire Soviet Union. Europe is up here. Black Sea is down here, and China is down here. So you see the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, in the upper left-hand corner of the map. At that time, they were Soviet socialist republics. And Russia has historically considered the Baltics to be the gateway to the West. Peter the Great built St. Petersburg in 1703 on the Baltic Sea, but the Baltics, with their ice-free ports, have remained a major draw for Russia throughout the centuries. And I think this map puts this very clearly into perspective and may even explain some of the geopolitics of the present day. Now, in 2010, Professor Timothy Snyder wrote a book called The Bloodlands. And he defined this as the territory caught between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. As you can see in the black part of the map, this was the Baltic states, Poland, Belarus, and Ukraine. Now, during the period of and between the First and Second World Wars, 14 million people perished as victims of Soviet and Nazi killing policies, and more than were killed due to the wars themselves. So, as you can see, the Baltics have had a brutal history, and not even that long ago, due to their geographic location. So, now let's take a step back and let me talk a little bit about my families and my map collection. So now that I've set the stage, I'll tell you about how we've collected maps of this important region of Europe. Allow me to introduce you to my father, Professor Lars Grava. He was born in 1934 in Liepāja, Latvia, and passed away 10 years ago. He was a professor of urban planning at Columbia University for 45 years and worked around the world. He started collecting maps of the territory that is now Latvia in the 1960s, and he visited the antique bookstores of New York, London, Amsterdam, and other places, and he collected approximately 400 maps, 400 antique maps. And so I grew up with antique maps all over the walls of my parents' apartment. They've been part of my life from the very beginning. And here's me. This is a photo of me in Washington, D.C. with 50 maps on the walls and about 350 in the map cabinet. As you can see on the right-hand side, the maps are divided into different shelves. So there's Riga, Livonia, Kurzemer, Courland, Baltic Sea, Scandinavia, Poland, Lithuania, etc. But again, they all have in common the territory of Latvia. So I was born and raised in New York. During my free time, I went to Latvian Saturday school, Latvian folk dancing, Latvian Boy Scouts, and Latvian summer camp. And I think a number of the people who've joined this Zoom call share that history with me. I lived in Latvia from 1998 to 2008, and I had an apartment in the old town of Riga. And the church steeples of the old town were exactly the same ones that were depicted in my parents' centuries-old panoramas of the old city. So I have to make a disclaimer here. I'm talking about antique maps. However, I am not a cartographer, nor a historian, nor an artist, nor a sailor, linguist, designer, geographer, antique bookseller, or academic. these are all disciplines that are relevant to the study of antique maps. So me, I'm just a guy who really likes maps. And in preparing this presentation, I used my father's collection and the materials he had written about it. So even though he has not been with us for a long time now, I felt like this has been a collaboration between me and him. And almost all the maps that I'm presenting are from that collection. So let's get into it. Let's take a look at some of the antique maps of the Baltics. This is the oldest map in the collection by Fries from 1520. And it's a map of Central Europe from the Mediterranean in the south to what they call here the Mare Sarmaticum. And in this map, it's very interesting because you can see how the level of detail differs. If you look at the bottom towards the right, you see elaborate coastlines and cities, and this may designate Turkey and Greece and Italy. But the further north you go, the more abstract the coastlines are. So here on the left-hand side, on the top, we see Scandia as a green island. So maybe that was what they believed Scandinavia looked like. Here's Gotia or Botia, which may be part of Finland. And here you see this is where the Baltic states ought to be in this straight line. So it was clearly terra incognita for many map makers. And as you may know, cartographers relied on ship's captains. For this reason, the territories that had developed trade were relatively more accurate than those that were not as developed. As you can see here, when you compare the Mare Sarmaticum, which may be the Baltic or the North Sea, with the territories around the Mediterranean Sea. Another interesting feature of this map is that it's a trapezoid, right? It's not a rectangle. It's shaped slightly differently. There are numbers on numbers on the top and on the sides. And this type of map was inspired by Ptolemy from Alexandria from 100 AD. And he was the one who was one of the first to offer a projection by which a spherical Earth could be rendered on a flat surface. So this is called a Ptolemaic map. Now, let's take another look at another map, which is not in my collection. I think it's probably a very well-known map from 1541. And it's a portolan of the Mediterranean Sea. A portolan is a sea chart. And it also has some adjoining territories. And I will ask you what's wrong with this picture. And some of you may already suspect where I'm going with this. So this is the Mediterranean down here. Then we've got the North Sea and we've got the Baltic Sea. This is the Baltic coastline. And it's almost a straight line. Here's a zoom in of it. And it's clearly a pretty sad state of affairs. There's not a hint of the peninsula of Courland, which I like to look for, or the river Daugava, or the Estonian islands. So clearly, at this stage of map making, the Baltics were off the radar screen of mainstream Europe. Now, here's a much better, maybe more favorable and flattering look at the Baltic Sea from 1740, about 200 years later. And it's of the countries surrounding it, and it doesn't have the boundaries of the empires and kingdoms, but it designates the various territories. And I like this map a lot because of its subtle and beautiful coloring, and it's also quite accurate. And this is a portolan, which is a sea chart. And it's a Dutch one from 1740, which was used for navigation. And it's a pretty comprehensive portolan of the Baltic Sea with networks of radiating and crisscrossing rhomb lines, a small compass rose at the center, dead center, and soundings, which are the depths of the Baltic Sea at a given place. It looks good. In fact, the Finnish islands are nicely represented. However, I wouldn't use it to navigate because Estonia is strangely compressed. So it's not exactly, so you can't really rely on this map very much to get around. So we're talking about Baltic Sea maps. And if we're talking about the sea, we should also think about what lives in it. So these are from portlands of the Baltic Sea. And you can look and these are in different maps from the collection. And what kinds of sea creatures do you see here? I think that the top two and the bottom right are pretty okay looking fish. This is not a narwhal, this is actually just a rhombline. So it's just, minus the fish minus that. And they could be one of the denizens of the Baltic Sea, like cod or sprat or herring or salmon or flounder. The middle one, however, is some kind of a mix between a whale spouting water and a fish and a dragon. And I can guarantee you that this does not live in the Baltic Sea. Now, in the bottom left-hand corner, we see a mysterious little animal. And I've asked people, what do they think it is? And I've heard seal or dog or hedgehog or groundhog or character from Dr. Seuss. But perhaps the most revealing thing that I've heard was from a Dutch friend who told me that the Dutch word for seal is sea dog. So maybe this is a sea dog kind of crawling up out of the water or jumping out. Another interesting feature of maps is scales, used obviously in order to denote distances. And this is a map of Poland, Lithuania from 1774. And you may be, I was certainly surprised by the number of scales used in this map. So we've got leagues of Poland, British miles, common miles of Germany, common miles of Lithuania, and statute miles of Prussia. And you can imagine how confusing it must have been in Europe to measure distances at this time. And I think that this also demonstrates the complicated geographic nature of the Baltics and the different powers that had an interest there. And I have to say, it certainly makes any confusion between miles and kilometers seem trivial by comparison. So this is probably the most beautiful map that I own. It's a portland, a sea chart. And if we were in person, I would ask you to tell me where is this place? What are we looking at exactly right here? And it's a little bit difficult. Sorry?
No, I want to play.
Okay. All right. Where do you think it is?
Well, north is on the. North is pointing to the bottom of the chart.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to guess it's Estonia on the top and Latvia on the right.
Fantastic. I mean, almost there. If we were here in person, I would buy you a drink for that. That's really a great observation. So north is south, south is north, west is east, and east is west. So basically what's happened is that it's upside down. The map is upside down, and this is part of northern Livonia. So this is the Estonian coastline. And here in the middle of it, you see Revel, which is now known as Tallinn, the capital of Estonia. And Latvia is a little bit further to the top. I can't say to the north or to the south because that doesn't seem to matter on this map, but it's to the north, to the top. So nice, well done. What I like about this map is the beautiful colors. So you've got this pink and yellow and browns and greens and blues. You've got two cartouches. And for those of you who don't know, a cartouche is typically or can be an ornate depiction of different types of information about the map. For example, the geographic area, what year was it made, who was the cartographer, who is it dedicated to, and it has these decorative features. Some can be very ornate and some can be quite plain. And on this one, for example, we see interesting curly cues, little faces, gemstones here. And on the right-hand side, there's an elaborate frame for the scales. Mercifully, only two scales are used here. You see the waves in the sea, and you see details like the depths or the soundings here, how deep the Baltic Sea is in these places. There are ships, and if you have ships, you should have sea monsters. So you've got some sea monsters here. You've got up here on the land, you've got forests and mountains and hills. And oops, one of the interesting features of this map are these land profiles at the top. So what I think this was for is, for example, if you're a sailor and you're looking at the coastline, these might be the features, the profile features that you would see. Now, I don't know how reliable they are or whether it was ever used like that, but I thought that this is a very interesting feature of the map. So now let's have a little history lesson about Livonia. So this is a modern map from 2011 depicting the ancient territory of Livonia, which is now Estonia and Latvia. As a result of the Northern Crusades, which we talked about, the Livonian Confederation was a loosely organized alliance between the Roman Catholic Church, crusading German knights, German merchants, cities, and the existing indigenous peoples like the Latvians and the Estonians. As you can see, it can be quite confusing with the various borders. Now, the Livonian Confederation lasted for almost 3.5 centuries. It ended in 1561 as a result of invasion from Russian Tsar Ivan IV and internal political instability. The lands were divided among the surrounding countries. So the north here went to the Kingdom of Sweden, and the south went to Poland, Lithuania. That was an accurate map of Livonia, but here's how it was depicted in 1550. On the left-hand side, you see a page from a book, which is in German, about the Kingdom of Poland. Now, if we zoom in, and it's in fact, it's right there behind me. If we zoom in and look at the area of Livonia, we see that there is pretty much a straight line here on the coast. So in other words, you don't see the peninsula of Courland and you don't see the Estonian islands. However, you see Livonia, you see Riga, you see the Depina, which might be the Daugava River, you see Lithuania, Litau, Vilna, Vilnius, and maybe Nemel, which might be the Nemunas River. So it's an approximate geography, but they meant well, and you know, it's some of the main elements of the Baltics are in this map. Now, another thing that's very interesting about maps of the Baltics is that it's a single place can have many names. Since the Baltic states have been subject to many different empires and rulers, and different cartographers have charted them, and the German place names have evolved over time, they just in my collection, you can see many different names for a single place. So on the left-hand side, we have what it's called in Latvian currently. If you looked on Google Maps or you looked at a recent map, this is what you'd see. But if you looked on an antique map on the right-hand side, this is what you'd see. Now, here's our second takeaway. How many ways can you pronounce the name Ikstile, which is a small town in southern Latvia? You can say it out loud with me, or you can keep it to yourselves, but let me try. So it's Ukskil, Ikskil, Ukskil, Ikskil, Ikskil, Ikstile. So that's kind of an interesting way of saying that name. The next slide is from the first atlas called Theatrum Orbis Terrarum by Ortelius from 1590. And this is part of the first comprehensive collection of maps of all parts of the world. And as I mentioned, the first atlas. So what we'll do is we'll take a look now, a closer look at the map on the bottom left. This is called A New Description of Livonia. And it's the oldest known map to be of the territory of Latvia. It is relatively detailed. There are 113 inhabited places and 8 rivers depicted on the map. So don't worry, I didn't count them all, but this is what I was told. So I will trust that information. And in cartographic history, this is considered one of the great achievements for the mapping of the Baltic states in the 16th century, because in a sense, it was the basis for subsequent maps. So in other words, later maps used this one and built on this one. And for now that you're very familiar with the geography of the Baltic Sea, you can see that the peninsula is there, but it's a little bit inaccurate. and the Estonian islands are also there, but again, they're not quite accurate. Now, the next map, which is of the same territory of Livonia, is very interesting because of what is new on it. So, for the most part, the Latvians and the Estonians were peasants and serfs and far removed from the ruling German elite. And today we would say they were disenfranchised. And that makes this map particularly important because it's one of the first times that you see the names of the indigenous peoples here. So here you see Esten, which is Estonians, and Letten, which is Latvians. So the map is not just about place names, but also about inhabitants. Now, this is a map from a map of Livonia, Courland, and Finland. This is the cartouche in the bottom left-hand corner. And it depicts several features of the Baltic economies. And at the very top, some of you may recognize what this is, others may not, but this is a beehive. And the reason we have a beehive here is because honey and beeswax were major exports of the Baltic states during this period in the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries. And you see here fish on the sides and on the bottom, and a cow which has seen better days hanging from the top. But here's the mystery, and it's the man here. It's this man, and what is he exactly? And I posed this question in a previous presentation, and I said, what do you think he is? And people said, oh, he's a beekeeper, or he's a trader, or somebody engaged in selling some kind of goods. But somebody came up with an extraordinary theory, and in fact, that person is joining the Zoom call right now. So a shout out to him. And Andris said that this is it might be a Livonian werewolf. So I thought Andris was just kidding, and sorry, but I just kind of brushed it off. But he was insistent, and apparently a Livonian werewolf is a thing. So a Livonian werewolf are things that people actually feared. And according to Professor Donecker of the Austrian Academy of Sciences, he wrote, quote, throughout the early modern period, the territory of Livonia, roughly corresponding to present-day Latvia and Estonia, was known as an abode of particularly vicious werewolves. Diabolic shape-shifting was a common feature in witch trials all over Europe, but no other country gained a similar notoriety as an alleged lycanthropy hotspot. So I learned a new word, which was lycanthrope, werewolf. And I also learned that what vampires were to Transylvania, so were werewolves to Livonia. And silly me, I just thought it was a guy in a furry cap. And this woodcut is unfortunately not from my collection, but it's from 1722, around the same time, and it is clearly a vicious werewolf undergoing a transformation. And this is your Halloween thought for the day to get you in the mood for trick or treating tonight. So, Swedish Livonia was a dominion of the Swedish Empire from 1629 until 1721. So it's down here in the corner. And in fact, the largest city in the Kingdom of Sweden at that time was not Stockholm, but it was Riga, the capital of Latvia. Karl XI, the King of Sweden, decreed that land needs to be surveyed, and he provided a robust methodology for cartography. So as a result, Swedish cartography was one of the best in the 17th century and produced good maps of Swedish Livonia. However, and this is something I discovered that I thought was very interesting, there was resistance from the local landlords living in Livonia. They did not want to get mapped. They refused, they fought back. And I was thinking, well, why would you not want to get mapped? What harm could possibly come in not being mapped? And it turns out that if you get mapped, you get entered into the land book, you get entered into the cadastral registry, and you get taxed. So this was a concern about getting taxed. So you can see that tax evasion has been with us for a very long time. Now, I also have 39 maps, antique maps of Lithuania in the collection. Lithuania had quite a different history from Estonia and Latvia. You will remember that at the beginning of this presentation, the focus of Lithuania's development was not so much west to the Baltic Sea, but more to the south and east. In the 13th century, the Lithuanians fought back the German Northern Crusaders and maintained their independence. During the 14th century, the Grand Duchy of Lithuania was the largest country in Europe, encompassing present-day Lithuania, Belarus, Ukraine, and parts of Poland and Russia. Now, here's another map of the Kingdom of Poland and the Duchy of Lithuania, when in 1569, Lithuania joined the Kingdom of Poland into the Commonwealth of Poland-Lithuania. Again, it was the largest country in Europe at the time and stretched from the Baltic Sea down to the Black Sea. The Commonwealth lasted for more than 2 centuries until neighboring countries systematically dismantled it from 1772 to 1795, with the Russian Empire annexing most of Lithuania's territory. And here, you'll notice the beautiful cartouche again in the upper left-hand corner. And you'll see again that there are beehives at the top with actual little bees flying around. Now, this is a shout out to Andrew, who is the webmaster and curator for a very impressive website called lithuanianmaps.com. So if you're interested in learning more about Lithuania, certainly more than I can provide in my very brief overview here, I would invite you to go to this website and check it out. He's got maps not only of Lithuania, but also of Estonia and Latvia and the neighboring countries. So there's a wealth of information there. Now, let me tell you about my favorite map. This is of the Duchy of Courland by the cartographer Homan in 1747. And I have this on the wall right behind me. And the more I have looked at it over the years, the more I've discovered and continue to discover. So allow me to share with you some of the hidden dimensions in this 2-dimensional map. So the map itself is of the southern and western part of Latvia. The Duchy of Courland, which existed from 1561 to 1795 for approximately 234 years. It was a vassal state of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, but it could carry out its own foreign affairs and economic policy. It even had 2 colonies, Gambia in Africa and Tobago in the Caribbean. It was about 10,000 square miles large, which is roughly the size of Maryland today. The map itself is overall pretty accurate. The peninsula looks good. There are beautiful colors, which are characteristic of Homan at this time, and there's great detail. But let's take a look at what I really like about it. So we will focus on the top right cartouche, the top left, top right, and bottom left features of this map. So let's take a look at the top left. Here we have, it's important to note here that the cartographer is mentioned as Barnacle, who was the main architect of the Duchy of Courland. And this will be important in just a moment. In the illustration, we see wheat, we see a scythe, we see what looks like a mug of beer, and we see 2 characters dressed in folk costumes. Now, the Latvians out there may recognize that if for this region of Latvia, this may be a pretty accurate rendition of a Latvian male folk costume, and the woman's, so-so, but there's something wrong with it. And I think that if you're familiar with Latvian folk costumes, you would immediately be able to spot what's wrong with it. It's the coloring. So the coloring is off. And what's interesting is that different maps, the same map can be colored differently. So here we have my map on the left-hand side with these 2 characters, and on the right-hand side, we have my friend Linda's map, which has exactly the same people, but they're colored differently. So I would say, and this can be, disputed, but I would say that the coloring here, at least for the man, might be more accurate. But what this really tells us is that the illustrator of this map may have known better what Latvian folk costumes look like, whereas the colorist wasn't quite as informed. Now, let's look at the right side of the cartouche. And here you see two scenes on either side of the cartouche. On the far right, we have a man, a fisherman, doing fisherman activity. He's carrying fish into a basket out from the sea. But on the left-hand side, we see something a little bit more action going on. And if we focus in on it a little bit, I would ask you, what is this? What animal is attacking the stag coming out of the forest? And I have heard from different people that it can be a bear or a wolf or a big dog. Somebody even said a werewolf. But I have three different reliable sources who gave me the surprising answer that this animal on the right-hand side is a wolverine.
Yep.
So I don't know if a wolverine can take down a stag, but I certainly like the thought of it. And wolverines have a reputation as ferocious animals. But it's a little bit bittersweet in this map because the last two wolverines in Latvia were shot about 130 years later in 1875. So this might have been a map showing an animal that existed at that time in Latvia. Now, let's go back to the map. This is the bottom left-hand side in the map. And if we try to read it, first of all, the first two lines are in Latin, but the third line and going down is definitely not in Latin. And I'm wondering if anybody, especially the Latvian speakers, if you can figure out what this is. So I'll read it to you. It says, "Mūsu tēvs debesīs, svētīts lai top tavs vārds." And that means in English, it means, "Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name." So it's the Lord's Prayer written in Latvian at the bottom left-hand corner of a map from 1747. So why would you have it there? What possible reason would you have to use a peasant's language, which almost never appeared in print, especially not on maps? Why would you have the Lord's Prayer there? And the answer to that question is in the first two lines in Latin. It says the Lord's Prayer written for the curiosity of the court. So in other words, this was for the reader of the map to see a little bit of local color, a little bit of local flavor, to see what the locals spoke at that time. Now, what I also like about this map is that there are multiple languages. So there's German, there's Latin, there's French, there's Polish, possibly Lithuanian, definitely Latvian, and also possibly English in this map. And I say that because there's one area, jurisdiction called Pilten District, which would not be written that way as Pilten District in any other language except in English. But wait, there's more. On a recent trip to Latvia, I went to the National Library of Latvia and I saw this map on the wall, and that's why you see some glare here. This map is from 1770. And does this map look familiar? It has exactly the same geography as the map we just looked at. And you can even see the two little folk people in the bottom left-hand corner, but slightly changed. So the man is wearing a slightly Germanic outfit and he's carrying a sword at this time, but it's essentially the same people. So what's going on here? And when I looked at it, I started to look at this cartouche on the top right-hand side, and I was thinking, well, what is this about? This is a zooming in on the cartouche, and it's something that's very unusual. So I applied my high school Latin and tried to figure out what this means. I saw some very strong words here. Ab erroribus, from the errors, falsum, false, misere, miserable, nunc liberatum, now liberated, So I'm like, what does all this possibly mean? I couldn't translate it properly from the Latin, so I asked a professor of languages at the University of Maryland, who's a friend of mine, if he could help. Then he asked a classical Latin scholar to translate it, but she couldn't do it. So she passed it on to two Neo-Latinists. Have you ever heard of that profession? And these two Neo-Latinists came up with the following translation of this cartouche. The first part is a little bit about what the area is, but then let me read from here halfway through. The son of the author, Adolf Grot Pastor, faithfully engraved it again carefully, and with much hard work now freed from the mistakes of Barnacle, who following a false copy drew it poorly and published it at Nuremberg in 1747, and he, Grot Jr., undertook to issue it for the public. So basically this map from 1770 takes a direct jab at a map from 1747. So what's going on here? This is what I've discovered. So Mr. Grot Sr. researched the territory of the Duchy of Courland from 1718 to 1725, and he worked on the map, the original map. Then he died in 1726. Mr. Barnacle was appointed as the main architect of the Duchy of Courland in 1738, and in 1747, Mr. Barnacle published the map. That was the one that we were looking at first. In the new 1770 map, Mr. Grot Jr. uses the cartouche to insist that his father is the real author of the map. So essentially what we're seeing here is that the son, Grot Jr., is reclaiming his father's intellectual property and authorship. So, who's right here? Who won the war of the cartouches? Was it Mr. Barnacle or was it Mr. Grot? Well, you may be disappointed. It's a draw. It's called the Barnacle-Grot map, and that's how academics call it. So you can see why I'm calling it the War of the Cartouches, because I'm not aware of a similar decades-long conflict about intellectual property rights recorded in any other antique maps. Okay, so after all that, let's look at a city. Let's look at the city of Riga, which is, of which I have about 40 maps and panoramas of Riga. It's the capital of Latvia, founded in 1201 by the Northern Crusaders, right in the middle of the Baltics and the largest city there. The population today is 641,000. And one of the most prominent new buildings in Riga is the National Library of Latvia. And it, if you go to the tippy top of the building, approximately here, you will see the map reading room at the National Library. And finally, after the building was constructed, the entire map collection has in Riga and in Latvia has been brought together into one place. And there are approximately 700 antique maps, which have been supplemented now by a large donation from a German Latvian. Now, if you're up here and you go to the windows and you look out to the left, this is what you see. You see a beautiful picture of the old town of Riga. So the river Daugava is right in front of you, and here's the old town. On the left-hand side, you see St. Jacob's Church, then the Dome Cathedral, then over here to the right, you see St. Peter's Church. That is Riga, what it looks like today. But let's step back to 1554. What did Riga look like then? Well, pretty much the same. The same churches are still there. So you see St. Jacob is here, the Dome Cathedral is here, and St. Peter's is here. And this is one of the best known cityscapes of Riga. Now, here's another picture of Riga from 100 years later. And it's a slightly different perspective from higher above. And here, it's worth mentioning that these are, if you look at the streets, I wouldn't use it to navigate because they're not entirely accurate. So it's not a good map for orientation. There are lots of ships concentrated at the docks. indicating that Riga was a pretty important commercial trade center. And there are the churches and streets and the canal and the symbol of Riga in the upper left-hand corner. And the old town of the city has remained the same in many ways, as I was mentioning. And it's a very beautiful city to visit. And I would recommend that you do so if you haven't, but don't go yet. Wait until the pandemic is over, and then Riga will be waiting for you. So that's my tourist spiel. Now, let's look at a different kind of map. This is the bombardment of Riga from 1705. And here you see a lot of action. You see plumes of smoke in the air. You see cannonballs flying through the skies. And this is the Great Northern War of 1700 to 1721. It was waged among Sweden, Russia, Poland, Lithuania, Saxony, Prussia, Denmark, and Norway. These countries were contesting the supremacy of the Kingdom of Sweden, which at that time held Livonia. In the top, it says in German, 1699, Saxon troops attacking Riga over the frozen river Daugava. So this is almost the same view that we had from the National Library. And here you see little men and little horses who are going across the river to attack. On the bottom, it says in German, view of the city of Riga from the Livonian perspective under the blockade of the King of Poland in 1701. And here again, you see the trajectory of cannonballs and the attack and the plumes of smoke rising. Now, I've been looking at this map for decades, but my little 12-year-old cousin discovered something that I had never noticed before, and I thought was pretty surprising and slightly disturbing. So this map is on the wall about, the bottom is 5 feet up and the top is 7 feet up from the floor. And my 12-year-old cousin, who was about 5 feet tall at the time, her head came up to here and she looked straight ahead and she saw something very interesting at the bottom of the map. She focused in on this. Now, if you look at it, let me go closer. This is actually a gallows on the Livonian side. So these must be unlucky Polish soldiers from the other side, or perhaps Livonian traitors who are being hanged from the gallows by the Swedish Livonian army. And again, this is a case where I hadn't seen it, somebody else looked at it, and you can find so much more history and interesting details, including these morbid details like we see here. So, okay, now let's look at another part of the map collection. Let's fast forward to the end of the First World War. It was after the First World War, there was a need to be resourceful. In 1918, World War I had ended and Latvia had declared independence. However, there was a severe paper shortage in Latvia. The new independent government of Latvia needed to print stamps for postage. They had to have commerce go on, but they didn't have stamps. They didn't have anything to print the stamps on. However, there was one source of large sheets of top quality paper. What was this? The German Imperial Army had left behind their military maps of the Baltic states when they retreated. Now, what the Latvian government did was they printed their first stamps on the back of these maps. So here you see the two sides. On the bottom here, you see the German imperial map, and turned around, you see the postage stamps of the Republic of Latvia, including with all their perforations. And this is considered to be a real cartographic curiosity and possibly unique in the world. And it's of interest for map collectors as well as stamp collectors, which my father was both. And today, we might call this upcycling. That is, taking something that's of little value, like an old useless Imperial Army map, and giving it greater value, like a sheet of stamps. So this has been an opportunity for me to present to a decades-long collaboration between my father and me, and present a fascinating but little-known corner of Europe. So I'd like to thank you very much for your attention, and I'll wrap it up right there. Thank you.
That's very good. Well, here, let me look at the chat here for any. Let's maybe open up to questions. If people have questions for Lars.
So I actually have a couple of questions for Laura based on this presentation. And that is that when Lars talked about the different colors in the two figures in competing maps, she posted a chat saying that neither of them were 18th century coloring. So how did you know that, Laura?
Well, it's something not even science can tell you because a colorist could fake old coloring, but it's just by eye. It's the translucency, and some of the greens and blues are 20th century. So it was, to my mind, they're sloppy because the engraving is so stunning of the costumes that the colorist hasn't paid attention to the ethnic colors. Like Lars said, the coloring doesn't match the historical fabrics. So a good colorist would research the fabrics and color it accordingly, but they're just not, it's not original. But it doesn't mean it's bad, it's just not accurate.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I've also learned that you can't, when a map is colored, you can't really tell when it was colored. I mean, it's difficult. No. It's difficult to tell. And sometimes people have just wanted a black and white map colored. So, so they've had it done. So I find that very interesting. And certainly you see that from that example.
Yes.
On paper, you had a question.
Tom, you're
I'm working on it. Yeah. Well, first of all, Lars, that was great. I really enjoyed it and learned a lot. I'm curious about Kaliningrad and Russia and that little slice of Russia that's to the south, and also just sort of how Russia has played itself out in the history of the Baltics.
Okay. So actually, that's a very interesting corner of Europe because it was a millennium ago. It was a Baltic land. It was Prussia, which was actually one of the several tribes of the Baltics, which was Latvia, Lithuania, and the Prussians. But over time, it was Germanicized through the Northern Crusaders. So, and over time after that, when the Germans left, it was called Karalauchi, then it was called Königsberg, and then after that, it was called Kaliningrad. So when the Soviet Union, after the Second World War, I think the Soviet Union occupied that territory, turned it into the exclave of Kaliningrad, and when that became entirely Russified, and all the former inhabitants had left, and the Russians were moved in, and that became a exclave of Russia after the Baltic states declared independence. So it's an interesting area, an island located now among NATO countries, which is Russian.
Yeah, I'd just like to add that following World War II, that whole area was East Prussia, and it was basically sliced in half, where the southern part was awarded to Poland, and the northern part was given to Russia, even though Lithuania fought to have it assigned to it because there are a lot of Lithuanians still in that area, Lithuanian speakers, and it is called Lithuania Minor, at least on the eastern part of Kaliningrad. And I think up until the breakup of the Soviet Union, or right after, it was considered the most polluted area in Europe for munitions and chemicals and all sorts of stuff.
There's a question, Lars, from Ellery Kurz as to whether you're adding to your collection at all anymore, or are you, are you still actively building the collection?
Slowly. I'm doing that slowly. I've actually taken this opportunity over the last 2 years to basically understand what I've got and to see what I would need in the future. And so I'm keeping track of what's going on among antique booksellers and seeing what's out there. But I actually have a wish list of the kinds of maps that I would like to have. One is actually the Grot map from 1770. You know, I have the 1747 one, but I'd love to get the 1771. I'd love to have a river chart of the river Daugava, and which these are interesting maps because they show, you know, how the river winds and the main cities that go along them. Sometimes it's even, you know, drawn in horizontal frames. I'm also interested, I don't know, and maybe somebody knows if there were any Russian publishing houses or cartographers who might, I mean, I know that there are maps in Russian, but I'm not aware of Russian publishing houses which would have published antique maps of the Baltic states. So, you know, so those are the things that I'm on the lookout for right now.
Interesting.
I'll send you some of those, Lars.
Fantastic. Thank you, Andrew.
What's interesting, we took a trip. I was at the IMCOS meeting maybe 3 years ago. We went to, I think we were in Hamburg, then we went to Berlin. We took a day trip to Lublin, which is where the Hansa traders were. And a lot of their maps look a lot like some of the imagery on some of the maps you showed with the little town, the gates and so forth, and the cartouches. It looked a lot like what you saw there at sort of north, kind of, I guess, northeastern Germany at that point in time. Mm-hmm. The other comment was you had one map that you called, it was funny, you called it a Portland map, which it is, I guess, but it looked, because it was squared off. I mean, I usually think of Portlands as being more of the animal skin type with less, you know, less of the rectilinear kind of borders. It was the one I think that had the elevations of the coast that you envisioned a sailor would be looking at. That was a very beautiful map as well. Is it printed on? Is it on a vellum or on a skin, or is it?
I'm looking at it right now, and it's not a skin. I think it's a vellum.
Okay.
Yeah.
I put in a question late at the end there about the low.
Yeah.
Did you see that there? He talks about the no elevation, how there's no mountains, and that affected the borders. Can you elaborate on that, Lars?
Oh, so it's basically, this is a low-lying, it's called the Great Northern European Plain. And it's pretty much flatland stretching all the way from Belgium to Moscow. And the Baltics, and there are no, and this is the borders of the south of the southern Baltic, of the south of the Baltic Sea. And it's simply, there have been large neighboring countries on either side, and it simply has not been too difficult to move into these countries. I mean, you didn't have natural boundaries like mountains, which would kind of slow down the advance of an army.
Oh, got it. Okay. Thank you.
I can tell you that I've climbed the highest mountain in Lithuania, which was 300 feet.
So there's a kind of a Latvian duty, they say, to go to the Estonian mountain, which is 318 meters high, take a shovel full of dirt and bring it to the Latvian mountain, which is 312 meters high, so that eventually, you know, the Latvian mountain can get higher than the Estonian mountain.
That's great.
One other reason why there was actually a problem with the Germans invading the Baltics, both in World War I especially, and that is that the railroads in what had been the Empire of Russia were narrow gauge, whereas East Prussia, they were more of like standard gauge. So the Prussians or the Germans in East Prussia had trouble supplying their troops because basically their trains stopped at the border.
Mm.
Yeah,
interesting.
And that was actually, I have experienced that firsthand. I took a train, this was when the Soviet Union still existed. I took a train from Berlin to Riga, and when you get through I think you go through Germany and then Poland, and when you're entering Belarus, I think it was Belarus, the gauge changes, right? So the train can't continue. What they did was they actually literally lifted the train up and changed the wheels. I guess it's called the carriage underneath them. So wow. You're there in the sky while they're changing the wheels underneath you. And you cannot use the bathroom because you know what bathrooms on trains are like. So, you know, you're there, you're stuck there for 5 hours, and they've switched the wheels. they lower you down and you can continue your trip into Belarus.
Lars, I thought I remember that being in Warsaw. I mean, like we got off the train and we just had like several hours to hang out in the city while they were changing the carriages.
Mm-hmm.
They,
Okay.
they, like with these big jacks that just oh. It's like, get off now or you're going to have to stay here for 5 hours. So we just walked around the city for 5 hours and then came back and got back on the train. That was in 1984.
Yeah, I went in this must have been 1989 or so.
Yeah. Tom Paper, you had a question about the history of maps and the study of them in the Baltics today. You want to ask that?
Sure. Yeah. What's it? I mean, what's it like? Well, you know, are there people who are as interested as you are in all of this?
I think Andrew would probably be better placed to answer this than me, but I do know that there was a cartography company called Janusata, which after independence, they published a lot of fold-out maps, right, to use when you're just driving around or for whatever purposes that you needed. And I have been connected with the geographers at the National Library of Latvia. So there's still an ongoing, and I guess that at the University of Latvia, they have a geography department looking into this, but I don't know if Andrew has more information on that.
So I'm a member of the Lithuanian Cartographic Association, and the members are almost to a person focused on GIS and contemporary map making. The last time I was there, I actually took to a dinner all the important Lithuanian map collectors in Lithuania. There were 6 of us. And between us, we certainly have more antique maps than there are in any Lithuanian museum.
Interesting.
Yeah, most of the great maps of Lithuania were neither were they created in Lithuania nor were they collected by people in Lithuania. For the most part, they were collected by people outside the country.
So can I follow up? I asked, and so I want to confess something to the group that Steve Hannon's the one that infected me with the map gene 3 or 4 years ago. And part of the reason I think I'm beginning to realize why I love maps is because it lets me ask questions about all sorts of different subjects all at the same time, different aspects. And so I wrote these into the chat. I think they're fair questions. How are the 3 Baltics similar and different? And then also, are the Baltics in danger of Soviet intrusion in the way the Ukraine was and is?
Laura?
Okay. Shall I start with that one?
Sure.
Okay. If you go back into history, way back, like 8,000, 10,000 years ago, a long time ago, the original settlers of the Estonian lands were Finno-Ugrians. So they are related in linguistically to the Finnish language.
Hungarians.
What's that?
And to Hungarians.
And to Hungarians, yes. And to some small tribes in northern Siberia.
Right.
They're the Finno-Ugrics, whereas in Latvia and Lithuania were settled by the Balts. So that is a separate branch of the Indo-European language family. So Latvian and Lithuanian are similar. I can, if I see Lithuanian written, I can understand maybe 5% of it, 10% of it. But it's hard to, when I listen to it, I can't really understand it. When I see Estonian, forget it, nothing, can't understand a word. It's an entirely different language family. Now, as I kind of explained in the presentation, Estonia and Latvia have had a similar history. So even though linguistically they're not related almost at all, they've had a similar history being part of Livonia, whereas Lithuania went off on its own path. And had a much more illustrious history. Then when they all became parts of the Russian Empire, they were provinces of the Russian Empire. And when they were in the Soviet Union, they were the Baltic republics. So they've shared a lot of common history, especially since approximately becoming part of the Russian Empire. So that's my kind of take on it.
So I can add that there's a very different history in terms of religion.
Yeah.
In Estonia and Latvia, from being occupied and run by Swedes and Germans, or for many hundreds of years were primarily Lutheran. And whereas Lithuania and Poland were Roman Catholic. So there's a very different history in terms of religion. And also Russia gave Latvia and Estonia very much a pass in terms of language. And for almost right up until World War I, for over 100 years, they allowed the legal language in Livonia and Estonia to be German as opposed to Russian. So that was a major give to the fact that Baltic Germans were counts and had tremendous plots of land. They were the landowners, the Baltic Germans in Latvia and Estonia, whereas in Lithuania, the nobles often aspired to speak Polish and were more affected by their relationship with Poland than with anything happening up north or to the east with Russia.
Mm.
Yeah, that's a really important point, which is about the kind of the German landowning class, which was the kind of the group that was in charge of Livonia for many years, but not only when it was the Livonian Confederation, but even when it became part of the Russian Empire, there was still the German ruling elite, which maintained, I mean, this was the group and that was their language, whereas the Estonians and Latvians were within the Russian Empire still serfs. So it was, you know, that was the way the system was maintained at that time.
And what about Soviet intrusion?
You mean now?
Yeah.
I don't.
Frightened.
I can't. I mean, it's hard to say for me right now, but it's, you know, it's not the Soviet Union, of course, anymore. I'll have to defer on this question, but certainly they're members of NATO and the European Union.
So in the same way, Tom, that Russian trolls are trying to affect our upcoming election, they've been broadcasting, at least in Lithuania, on a daily basis, conspiracy theories about Lithuanians killing Russian soldiers, doing everything they possibly can to create unrest among the Russian minority. And the Russian minority in Lithuania is pretty small. It's much larger in Latvia, and again, smaller in Estonia. I think, Lars, today is what percent of the population in Latvia is actually ethnically Latvian?
Well, when the Soviet Union broke up in 1991, I think the Latvian population was about 51%, so it was reaching a critical threshold. Now it's significantly higher, but I don't know the exact numbers. I think it must be
The Latvian population is significantly higher.
Yeah.
Yeah. And part of the reason I'm asking is because I spent some time, I visited the Crimea area of Russia, well, now Russia, of the Ukraine, when it was the Ukraine in 2006. And I was so surprised at the sympathy for the Russians that existed in that area. So it didn't surprise me when Russia took over the Crimea.
Okay.
So I was curious if there was a similar, it sounds like it's not as sympathetic internally, even in Latvia, but I'm just speculating.
I want to shout out to Audrius. Hello, I see you there. We're talking about one of the major collectors and dealers of Lithuanian maps is on board there, and has been, right?
Yeah, labas, Andrew. Labas.
He's been, yeah.
Yeah.
Andrew, we've had someone had asked, Annette had asked for more information about the Lithuanian Map Society. So I said, anyone with interest in this area, please contact Andrew. You can find him on the New York Map Society website. His email is there, and he will gladly share with you what he has.
Any more questions? All right.
This is great.
Great. Well, hey, thank you for coming today. Look for our upcoming meetings on our website or our social media, on our Facebook or our Instagram. So we have Ian Fowler, who is our new, I guess he's, what is he? He's the member, not membership, he's the speaker and events coordinator. He's the curator at the New York Public Library. He's done a great job, and we have I think we're lined up through almost all of the spring of next year. Is that right?
That's right, and he has more folks committed, but haven't yet committed to a specific day.
Yeah, interesting group of authors with different map themes. So check out our website. You'll see what's coming, and you're free to join us and invite any friends who are just people who like maps. So we'd love to have you. Lars, thank you so much for your talk today. It was very interesting. I think to me, what I love is how maps, like as Tom said, can divert you into history and politics and family lineage and cartouche battles and wars. I think if those of you who study Henry Moll will also see that he's used his cartouches for political statements and stuff. So it's interesting all the different ways you can use a map. I'm Herman Moll. I'm sorry. All those who can use maps for all kinds of reasons. So very interesting.
Thanks a lot.
All right. Be good.
Thank
Happy
you.
Halloween. Watch out for werewolves. Bye-bye.
And vampires.
Marines.
A Latvian werewolf could be out there tonight. All right, bye.